Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, as always, we're going to take a look at the hidden machinery of global politics and state accountability, or at least the lack of such. We'll begin with a look at transnational repression, of course, as the global Sikh diaspora marked 3 years since the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. We ask why Western allies continue to shield the architects of that in New Delhi. Then we confront Westminster directly here in the UK with Jagtar Singh Johal passing 3,000 days of arbitrary detention. We take a look at an uncomfortable piece of evidence that exposes Keir Starmer's sudden political amnesia in pursuit of his trade deals. And we answer a direct call from one of our viewers to cover the brutal street violence here in the UK in Smethwick. And stepping from that immediate threat into a profound philosophical debate, that of the spiritual mandate of the Kirpan versus Western gun culture and the right to bear arms. And finally, we expose the legislative smokescreens in Washington and contrast India's hostility with the warmth of the Kartarpur corridor. So lots more to get through today, as always. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of great comments which have been filling up beneath the videos. So thank you, as always, for those. Right, let's get on. And of course, sadly, the 18th of June did mark that very sad anniversary. It was the back end of last week. The targeted assassination that took place on Canadian soil of a Canadian citizen. How outrageous is that? It still stands outrageous even 3 years later. Well, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, he was, of course, a prominent Sikh activist. He was a husband, he was a father, and of course, he was very much a leading voice for Sikh self-determination. He was very much an advocate for Khalistan, which obviously made him a target of India. And he was gunned down outside his Gurdwara, the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. Now, at the time, mainstream Western media treated it as local gang violence. Yeah, how familiar that story is. And they treated it as an isolated incident. But, of course, within months, it was their very own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who stood up in the House of Commons and changed the geopolitical landscape forever. A very brave thing to do. Because he pointed the finger directly at the Indian state. It was pretty unprecedented, it has to be said. And he spoke of credible allegations linking agents of the government of India to the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian territory. Well, 3 years later, where do we stand? These guys, 4 Indian nationals. Their names are Amandeep, I think going from left to right, Amandeep Singh, Karan Brar, Kamalpreet Singh and Karanpreet Singh. They're facing trial in Canada, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. And at every single court hearing, the Sikh community has turned out in mass numbers. Of course they would, and well done to those guys. They fill the public galleries, they're very vocal, they line the streets outside the courthouse. Well, the obvious question, why? Well, there's an obvious answer, because they know that what's on trial in that Canadian courtroom, it's not just these guys, it's a lot more to that, it's a much bigger story. It is, of course, on trial is the whole the systematic, multi-layered apparatus of transnational repression, this term that is relatively new to many of us since obviously this started happening. Now, the defence lawyers of these guys will argue about forensics, timelines, cell phone data, but in reality, it's the community, and in fact, the global community is looking at the bigger picture. They are demanding accountability for what's now been meticulously documented by international intelligence agencies. We know this, and I say it's one of the worst kept secrets in the global community. Who is really behind all this? Because they've been documenting, and the intelligence agencies know full well, in reality, that there's a deeply entrenched, highly sophisticated government criminal nexus operating from New Delhi, sourced from New Delhi, of course. And last week, we, of course, did mark the anniversary, the sad anniversary of the death of Jagtar Singh Kandar here in the UK. And so, of course, it's not hard to connect the dots to the same killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And the strategy is very clear. It's an extrajudicial, anti-Sikh transnational agenda. And it has one simple goal, and that's designed to silence dissent, to target these activists, the Khalistani activists, and strike fear into the heart of the global Sikh diaspora for advocating for Khalistan. But, as I keep saying, The strategy is failing. It's failing because the diaspora refuses to be silenced. The community groups on the ground in Canada, the UK, the US, right round the world, Australia, Europe, we've seen it everywhere. They're making one thing entirely clear to Western governments. Prosecuting shooters, people like this, is just not enough. That is not enough. That is not solving the root cause of this problem. Putting the low-level operatives like this in a cage doesn't solve the problem when the actual architects of this crime, this whole criminal agenda, terrorist agenda, let's call it for what it is, they, the architects of that, are sitting in offices in New Delhi. Shielded, of course, by diplomatic immunity and economic leverage. So as we watch these proceedings unfold in Canada, we will just continue week after week. We will continue to follow the evidence. We will continue to ask these questions because the mainstream struggle to do so. The mainstream broadcasters find it a little bit too uncomfortable to voice because it obviously is such a controversial thing to call out a state like India for terrorist enterprise like this. A few outlets have done it in the mainstream. They've touched upon it. Well done to them. But on the whole, they're just a little bit too afraid to call India out. Because ultimately, if a sovereign state can deploy hit squads to assassinate political dissidents, whether it's in Vancouver, here in the UK, in Birmingham or in New York, it doesn't matter. If they can get away with it with total impunity, ultimately, what does that mean? That means the very concept of national sovereignty is dead. It's sending a green light to India that it's okay to kill British citizens, Canadian citizens, American citizens, European citizens, Australian, New Zealand citizens. It's okay to kill them on their own soil. That is the message that our own governments are sending to New Delhi, unless they actually stand up and do something about it. Every time they prostitute themselves for these trade deals, they are sending that green light just a shade brighter every single time. And that is why we and all of us across the world have got to hold our own governments to account for this. To say these guys are the low-level operatives. We all know who's behind it, and our government knows behind it. Our intelligence agencies know who's behind it. And it's up to them, really, ultimately, to hold our government's feet to the fire. So anyway, let's wonder if God willing, touch wood and everything, if we're here in a year's time, the 4th anniversary of Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, will anything have changed? Who knows? Who knows what a lot can happen in a year? We'll wait and see. Right, let's move on. And another outrage, another failure of governments, and again, us holding their feet to the fire. Jagtar Singh Johal. And really, ultimately, if you need to see just how Western governments compromise their own citizens' lives to protect foreign trade relationships, I mean, this is one prime story which really highlights it as clearly as you would ever need to see. Of course, it's Jagtar Singh Johal. He's a name well known to everybody who watches this show on a regular basis, because we will not forget the plight of Jagtar Singh Johal. And for those who've been living on Mars for the last few years who don't know Jaggy, he is, of course, a British citizen from Scotland, a place called Dumbarton. And he went to Punjab in 2017 to get married. And he just popped out, I think, for a pack of cigarettes or something from the local shop. And he was suddenly bundled into the back of a van by plainclothes police officers. And he's pretty much never been seen since. And this week does, of course, mark a very grim, heartbreaking milestone. And I think it's, it was 3,150 days on the 19th, that was back in the last week, that he's been held in arbitrary detention. It's just outrageous. I mean, that is over 3,000 days without a shred of credible evidence presented against him. And last year, back in March, Jaggy was formally acquitted by a district court in Punjab for one of those cases, one of those 8 cases that are lined up against him. The court rejected the allegations, and they said that the prosecution had, quote, miserably failed to prove its case. And all the remaining cases are essentially mirror images or copies, blueprints, whatever, templates of that same charge. And under the rules of double jeopardy, which basically means you cannot be tried for the same crime twice, in theory, in any normal democratic nation, under the democratic rule of law, all those other cases should have just fallen like dominoes and just been acquitted. But he still remains in arbitrary detention. Why? Well, the Indian National Investigation Agency did slap him with these 8 duplicate cases, zombie cases as many have described them. They're all based on exactly the same fake confessions extracted under torture, under brutal electrical torture. He was tortured. We know he was tortured nearly 9 years ago. And it really, all this, as I say, it is a textbook violation of the double jeopardy laws. That principle explicitly banned by international law and even banned by India's own constitution. So again, from any legal angle that you look at Jagtar's detention, it is basically illegal. Anyway, what's interesting? Fortunately, even there are those in our British Parliament who have not forgotten, and they still press our useless government for action. And partway through last week, this utter mockery of justice did finally be raised once again in Parliament, not just by his own MP, and I'll show you a video shortly, he did. But there was a debate on this bill, the Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill. I'm thinking, why on earth is that relevant to the case of Jagtar Singh Johal? Well, during that debate on the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, a former leader of our right-wing party, the Conservative Party, a guy called Sir Ian Duncan Smith, he stood up in the House of Commons and he actually took a direct shot at Keir Starmer. And he didn't just take a shot, he brought the receipts. This is the quote from what's called Hansard. This is our public record, our official record of all the debates that happen in our Parliament. And Sir Ian Duncan Smith reminded the House that while he was in opposition, Keir Starmer, our current, and as I say current, I mean literally he may go today. This is how current this is. As I sit recording this at 6 a.m. on Monday morning in UK time, Keir Starmer is still our British Prime Minister, but it is very likely that he might not be, or at least he might announce his resignation literally in the next few hours. But anyway, that's some hot off the press news. Anyway, back to this debate. So Ian Duncan Smith reminded Keir Starmer when he was in opposition, he wrote a formal letter, a scathing letter to the Prime Minister of the time, Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary at the time, Boris Johnson, and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the time. So Keir Starmer wrote to the Prime Minister, making his position very, very clear. He wrote that Jagtar's detention was entirely arbitrary. He wrote that Jagtar had been, quote, gravely mistreated with no legal basis. He demanded that the British government officially call for Jagtar's immediate release. Now, that was Keir Starmer in opposition, hunting for votes, trying to get your vote. And Keir Starmer now sitting in number 10. Since the Labour government took power, there's been a deafening, cowardly silence from our Prime Minister, Surrender Keir Starmer. Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper, that useless, incompetent blancmange of a Foreign Secretary, recently travelled to India for talks with her counterpart, Subramanian Jaishankar. And ahead of that trip, Jaggy's MP, Douglas McAllister, met with Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, personally, and he presented her with a very clear, actionable plan to bring Jaggy home. He told her simply raising this case is just not enough anymore. We've been doing that for 8 years with zero effect. And Jaggy himself actually apparently sent a message from his cell to Yvette Cooper saying, I am stuck in a broken country with a broken judicial system. So, Yvette Cooper was under absolutely no illusions what everybody else feels and what she should do. And I'm just going to play you, actually. Now, this is the debate Sorry, this is debate. This is the MP, Douglas McAllister, Jaggie's MP, once again speaking in Parliament.
Douglas McAllister.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for raising the case of my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal during her recent visit to India? Can she update the House if these discussions were positive, and are we any closer to securing his release and return home to West Dunbartonshire?
Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend is right. I did raise this case while I was in India. I know how much my honourable friend has been championing the case of his constituent. We have raised it. There is, I think, long concern about the length of time without resolution on this case, and we will continue to raise it.
I mean, what does that mean? As we keep saying, you talk about it, you're raising it, but the results are zero. You're quite happy to shout up and talk about trade deals and really big up the trade deals that you secured. But where is Jagtar Singh Johal? Again, it's just another anodyne, pointless statement from the blancmange who is Yvette Cooper. In other words, she returned from Delhi with absolutely nothing but weak excuses and diplomatic platitudes. And where's Keir Starmer in all this? Well, so, of course, this sudden amnesia, Keir Starmer. Remember your demands when you were in opposition for the immediate release of Jagtar Singh Johal. Why are you not standing up in Parliament and shouting that India must immediately release Jagtar Singh Johal? I don't remember seeing any statement from Keir Starmer of any real description about Jaggi. He's referred to him indirectly, but has never actually stood up and made those very same demands that he made in opposition. Why is a case that was, quote, in his words, a grave violation of human rights when you're sitting in opposition, why has it suddenly just become a minor diplomatic inconvenience now that you're in power? And the answer is, well, it's as old as politics itself. It's trade deals. The British establishment is so desperate to secure this free trade agreement with New Delhi that they're literally willing to treat the life of a British citizen as a disposable bargaining chip. They've allowed the Indian state to dictate the terms. And again, I will not stop having a go at Keir Starmer because apart from the fact he's the most unpopular Prime Minister, British Prime Minister in our history, he's also one of the most useless and I actually have to say one of the most disgusting Prime Ministers because in opposition he promised us a 1984 inquiry into the British government's involvement in Operation Blue Star. He demanded that over and over again whilst in opposition. And he promised when he was if we all voted for him to be Prime Minister, he would initiate an inquiry into Operation Blue Star. 2 years later, it's been quietly shelved. In opposition, he was demanding that the government, British government, demand an immediate release of Jaggi by India. And now he's in government. Not a word, not a peep, not a squeak out of the little piggy-eyed man. Apologies for being so personal, but I personally, like many in this country, despise the man and his failures. Interestingly, this is a letter signed by 60 MPs. It's a cross-party letter that was actually initiated by Jaggi's MP, Douglas McAllister, that gentleman who was stood up in Parliament you just watched. This letter obviously demands immediate executive action. This letter, interestingly, and I mean, you can read it at your leisure, but it says all the predictable sort of stuff. It's signed by 60 MPs. Now, interestingly, I went through the signatories of this letter. We have 11 Sikh MPs here in the UK. You would expect to see all 11 Sikh MPs' signatures on this letter. We don't. I have to say, I was actually quite shocked, and I had to check and recheck, thinking, hang on, why are 11 Sikh MP signatures not on this letter? There's all sorts of cross-party signatures from all parties. There are only 3 Sikh MPs who've signed this letter. Tan Desai, who I often have a go at, so thank you, Tan, well done for doing that. Vrinder Singh Jus and Nadia Whitone. They're the only 3 Sikh MPs who who signed it, who did sign it. Now, those who didn't, the walk of shame belongs to Preet Kaur Gill. I'm surprised because she's usually very, very active defending the Sikh community. Baggy Shankar, Gurinder Singh Joseph, likewise, he's usually quite vocal when it comes to Sikh issues. Jivan Sanda, Jas Atwal, again, normally quite vocal defending the Sikh community, particularly when it came to Kirpan. Sonia Kaur Kumar, Harpreet Kaur Upal, Kirith Alwalia Entwistle and Satvir Kaur. The walk of shame. Why did you not sign it? I mean, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't know that Douglas was writing this letter, but I'm sure Douglas would have targeted them immediately. I don't know, is the answer. And probably not get an answer. But I have to say, when it comes to MPs, regular viewers of the show know my feelings about MPs and how duplicitous and how career-minded they tend to be these days. There's very few MPs in our parliament, and probably across all your parliaments, who are driven by genuine motivation to do good, to represent the interests of their constituents. They're more interested in their own careers, sadly, so one wonders if it's linked to that. But ultimately, the hypocrisy, it's there, it's laid bare on the pages of Hansard. There. Keir Starmer himself. Where has it come back? There you go. Keir Starmer. I mean, the hypocrisy of Keir Starmer. You wonder, those of you outside the UK who might think, why is Keir Starmer so unpopular? Well, here's just one example. The guy's full of it. You know, in opposition, he promised the world. He promised the earth. He said, I will deliver you everything. And now as Prime Minister, he seems to have forgotten. Basically, and don't forget, he's a human rights lawyer, supposedly. He's quite happy to give away British territory to Chinese interests, like the Chagos Islands. And it's been said that he's actually in the pay, or at least he seems to be working for China. Every decision he makes seems to be for the benefit of China. And now, maybe for the benefit of India, it would appear. Anyway, enough of Starmer. All he does is make my blood boil. Let's move on. And yes, thank you, Mai Akita. You made a comment, actually, and I did see this. And interestingly, I had actually seen this story, and I thought, I don't want to cover it yet because there's just not enough information coming out into the public domain. This is, it's a story, of course, you mention it in your comment. Can you cover the story of the Sikh elderly man who was attacked in Smethwick here in the UK on the 14th of June, that was last week, by 2 white youths who beat him up and tried to set him on fire? The media and its dogs have kept it quiet. Yes, so there is an allegation here by Mai Akita that it's being hushed up. Well, thank you for your comment. And of course, as I say, you are right to point out that when a lot of these attacks happen against the community, the mainstream press can be a little bit sort of slow to react. And quite often, a lot of these stories are buried. And it's up to you guys really to dig it out. When if you are on the ground locally, you of course know about it locally, but it doesn't hit the national press sometimes. And there does seem to be quite a profound double standard in how urban violence is often prioritised in national newsrooms. So yeah, I will take a look at this case. As I said, I've been watching it, thinking, should I report this? Is it relevant really to what we talk about? Yes, it is a Sikh man who was attacked, but was there an element of hate crime attached to it? Was it, was it even linked to the Henry Novak case? Well, a statement obviously was issued by West Midlands Police. And so we will look at some of the verified facts that happened about this attack. And it happened in a place called St Paul's Road in Smethwick here in the UK. And it happened on Sunday evening, the 14th of June. Now, a man in his 50s, he was subjected to an assault. And it was a very severe, savage assault. And he's still in a critical life-threatening condition in hospital even now. So again, that's how serious this assault was. And the response from West Midlands Police escalated quite rapidly. And over the last 48 hours, detectives from the Major Crime Unit have arrested somebody and charged two guys, two 17-year-old youths. They've been charged with attempted murder. I mean, teenagers, youngsters, almost children effectively. Now, what's not verified and has not been officially recorded or at least released by West Midlands Police, and I've only got this from comments, in fact even your comment, Maya Keith, and other comments across social media, is that it may or may not be true, but people have said that the guy, the victim, was discovered on the floor having been set alight by these two youths in a secluded wooded area. So that bit is unverified, but there's a lot of people on social media saying that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true, but anyway. So the real question is, what was the motivation behind this crime? Was it a hate crime or was it something else? Well, it's a complex investigation. And as the initially as a community anxiety peaked, just straight after the incident, the local community obviously feared it was a racially or religiously motivated attack. But yesterday, or 2 days ago now actually, West Midlands Police did issue that formal update that changed the narrative. And their Chief Superintendent, Kim Madill, said that following the receipt of new information, the major crime team is now officially treating the assault as a hate crime, but due to an explicitly homophobic comment made by the attackers during the incident. The police explicitly stated there is currently no evidence that the attack was motivated by race or religion. So in fact, they're actually saying it wasn't a hate crime motivated by the fact that the victim was a Sikh. It was actually more to do with homophobia. And that distinction actually has, unsurprisingly, sparked a wave of quite critical discussion across social media, particularly Sikh social media, and Sikh Press Association as well. They've been on it. And for many within the community, the police narrative does leave a lot of questions unanswered. Now, that initial silence, that slow release of information, and the precise categorisation of the motive, of course, being viewed by many as, okay, what's really going on here? Because when an individual from a historically targeted community like the Sikh community is beaten or attacked to the brink of death, the psychological impact on the wider community is identical. It doesn't matter what the legal definition is of what his attack was, whether it was homophobia or whether it was religiously or racially motivated. The effect essentially on the same community is the same. And it does expose a very raw, persistent vulnerability. And it reminds the Sikh community that safety on our streets, it doesn't matter if you're in North America, down under, Europe, wherever, it means that when these crimes happen, safety is just an illusion. It reinforces this growing sentiment that if our mainstream institutions fail to protect or even look at the vulnerable or even call it out for these attacks what they are, the community has no choice but once again to look to its own traditions for resilience. And that is a beautifully euphemistic phrase for saying the community is going to have to look at itself for its own self-defence. Which brings me on, rather conveniently, to the philosophy of the Kirpan. And again, I know many of you in our audience quite often talk about this right to self-defence. And all of us do have an innate human nature condition. So, look, of course we have a right to defend ourselves. It is one of the most basic human rights. If I am attacked, I have the right to defend myself. And it really does bring it back to this sort of whole foundational debate that's now playing right across the world, literally across the diaspora, the whole global diaspora, after the Henry Novak killing. And interestingly, just a few days ago, there's been viral footage coming out of Uttar Pradesh in Haryana. I saw this and I thought, how interesting, because it's so timely, with obviously in the context of the Henry Novak situation. And it's where members of the Sikh community have had to brandish or utilise the Kirpan in clear, undeniable scenarios of self-defence. And of course, right across, many of you commented, and there are so many comments across general social media from the Sikh community about bearing the Kirpan, is that we have to carry our Kirpan because we need it for self-defence. I'm going to show you a video. Right, ignore this guy. I'll let this play in the background. But as I talk, I want you to watch these excerpts from this video. I think this is, I think it's Uttar Pradesh. No, I beg your pardon. I think this might be Haryana. It's a viral video of a Sikh who was attacked, clearly. And there's no context. I've got no context around this other than from literally what you can see. He climbed out of his truck. And I think if you notice his truck's up against another truck, I wonder if there's been an accident and the crowd has gathered to try and attack him. And he's had to jump out of his truck, waving his Kirpan. There you go. Look at him. The crowd are sort of moving around him. And so clearly he's having to use his Kirpan in a self-defensive, quite an aggressive self-defense, but that doesn't matter. It's still self-defense. He's literally probably wielding it to save his life against a crowd who are gathering around him, presumably to potentially attack him. And so when incidents like this surface, secular Western commentators tend to react with predictable, almost textbook alarms, like, oh, they see a sword being waved around, a machete, quite often they describe it as. They don't really understand what this is all about and the actual elements of this. I'll put this on loop. Where are you? There we go. So that you can keep watching as I keep talking. Because they immediately classify anything like this. They sort of immediately classify it through that sort of narrow clinical lens of weapon carrying and knife crime. Of course, that whole debate we had about the post-Henry Novak killing. So Sikhs should not be allowed to carry Kirpans, blades. It is an offensive weapon. But ultimately, as you guys all know, in the Sikh ethos, the Kirpan is not an offensive weapon. By very definition, it is not an offensive weapon. It is, of course, one of the 5 sacred articles of faith mandated by Guru Gobind Singh Ji in 1699. But it is explicitly carried for defence. But not merely defence of the self. And this is where it's the whole definition and the whole understanding of what the Kirpan is really important in this whole debate about the Kirpan. Of course, most people out there in the world just can't be bothered to understand the truth, the true meaning of the Kirpan. And the theological mandate of the Kirpan it's not the defence of the self, it is the defence of the defenceless, the protection of the weak, the absolute preservation of human dignity in the face of tyranny or lawless violence. That is why the Kirpan is carried. And many Sikh advocacy groups, particularly those operating in North America, have actually begun to draw a structural parallel. And in fact, even I actually thought, this is an interesting thing. Enough of that. Right. Because I thought, actually, hang on a second. This is interesting because particularly in the States, and it's very different to the UK. In the UK, it is illegal to carry a blade. It is certainly illegal to carry a gun. And it's illegal in most cases almost to even own a gun. There are exceptions to that. But essentially, gun ownership in the UK has been all but wiped out. Of course, the situation is very different in America, which made me think, okay, because there is the right to bear arms in America, which is fiercely defended by US citizens. The pro-gun lobby fiercely defend this. And I have to say, I personally am a big defender of the right to bear arms. And it's an interesting parallel to the Kirpan, the right to bear the Kirpan. And I thought, okay, well, let's compare and contrast these two rights. Are there genuine parallels? Are they the same concept? Turns out, no, it's not. And this is, again, part of this sort of educational journey and part of this sort of philosophical discussion about the right to bear arms and the right to bear a Kirpan. Because the right of a Sikh to carry a Kirpan for protection, it needs to be understood in the modern context through this same philosophical framework as the US Constitution, and specifically, of course, this Second Amendment, the fundamental right to bear arms for self-preservation, for self-defence. Now, it is actually quite a fascinating comparison, but if you dig a bit deeper, the contrast between the two concepts actually tells us everything about the difference between a spiritual society and what's called an individualistic one. And again, this is why it gets a bit philosophical, and it's an important distinction, this. And I hope you bear with me on this, because it does actually highlight the difference between the right to bear a gun and the right to bear a kirpan, which in turn reflects the different philosophical context of why you can carry either. Now, on the surface, the mechanics, legally speaking, they're identical. They look identical. Both arguments rest on this simple, undeniable truth: the state does not possess a monopoly on immediate protection. In other words, it's not just entirely up to the state to protect you. So when an elderly man, for example, is beaten on a roadside in Smethwick, or a shopkeeper is cornered by an armed gang or a truck driver in Haryana, the police are minutes away at least, when survival could be measured literally in seconds. You can't rely on the police to get there immediately to protect you. And in those windows of time, an individual must have a basic means to survive. But, as I say, beneath the surface of the law, the underlying philosophies are worlds apart between the right to bear arms, carry a gun, and the right to carry a kirpan. The American right to bear arms, as interpreted by modern gun culture, it's built on a foundation of what's called hyper-individualism. Isolation basically means I, as a human being, as an individual human being, driven by an all-consuming paranoia. I must protect myself. It's a philosophy born out of fear, simple fear. Fear of your neighbour, fear of the outsider, fear of the state even. I must have a right as an individual to defend myself against all attacks. That's what drives the firearm being an instrument of personal sovereignty. It's different from any moral or spiritual obligation to the collective community. You own a gun to protect your property, your family, your patch of land, yourself as an individual. It's just a basic view of human survival, individual human survival. But this is where the philosophical difference is about the right to carry a gun in the States and the right to carry a kirpan. There is a massive fundamental difference. The kirpan is not an instrument of paranoia, this feeling I've got to protect myself. It's an article of dharam, of righteous duty. And do watch my podcast with Dr. Greywell a few weeks ago. We talked about dharam and the panth, and what the panth is and how to define dharam and the panth. But basically the kirpan is an article of dharam, of righteous duty. It's anchored to a strict, non-negotiable spiritual discipline. A Khalsa Sikh does not draw the kirpan ever out of anger or malice or dominance or territorial dominance. The code of conduct demands that it always remains sheathed until every single peaceful, diplomatic, legal avenue has been completely exhausted. In other words, it literally is a weapon of last resort. And when it is drawn, the purpose is fundamentally altruistic. That basically means it is for a wider good. The kirpan, symbolically speaking, belongs to the community, not just the individual. It represents a physical vow that the wearer will stand between the oppressor and the oppressed, regardless of the oppressed's race, caste or creed. In other words, it is a symbolic weapon to fight all oppression against anybody who is oppressed, not just you as an individual. And that's the fundamental philosophical difference. So the Second Amendment provides an individual with the raw power of destruction from a distance. The kirpan needs proximity. You need to be physically close to somebody to wield a kirpan. It's ultimate visual accountability. But of course, it's driven by intense spiritual restraint. In other words, wielding the kirpan isn't just a simple act of physical self-defense. It is more than that. It is spiritually controlled. It is drawn under a spiritual concept, and it is wielded likewise. In other words, the gun is rooted in the right to destroy. The kirpan is rooted in the duty to protect life. And that's the sort of the philosophical differences. So when we look at the streets of the UK, where the state seeks to increasingly restrict religious articles under offensive weapons legislation, or in the United States, where gun violence obviously just it's everywhere. It's horrific. The conversation about the right to bear arms, or the right to bear the Kirpan, is on a different level. We need to remind these lawmakers that the Kirpan isn't a loophole in public safety. It's a time-tested, spiritually bound institution of public protection. That's why it is so important here in the UK to maintain the right to wear the Kirpan, because it means so much more than how it's viewed as just a simple offensive weapon. It is a symbolic weapon against oppression. That's ultimately what it is. It is not like a gun that is literally there just for an individual self-defense. I hope that makes sense to you guys. Oh, of course it makes sense to you guys. You know better than I do the symbolism of the Kirpan. But for those of you who might not be bearing a Kirpan, that is really the fundamental difference. So I hope that sort of makes it clear. Right, let's move on. Gosh, the clock is counting down. Yes, this Washington. Our old friend Peter Friedrich, and again, I've got to be slightly, what's the word? Ambivalent towards Peter Friedrich, because apparently he's not. He doesn't align with the Khalistan movement, but he does do some great work to highlight Hinduphobia wherever it appears. And he's launched a devastating new video series looking at the legislative machinery behind House Resolution 69. This is a bill introduced by Congressman Shri Tanadar that aims to get the US Congress to formally condemn an alleged epidemic of what they call Hinduphobia. Yes, here we go again. Let me play.
I'm standing outside the office of Congressman Shri Tanadar, the man who introduced House Resolution 69, a measure asking Congress to formally condemn something called Hinduphobia. On its face, that sounds fine. Nobody should face bigotry for being Hindu, and I would not argue otherwise for a second. But the question was never whether anti-Hindu bigotry exists. The question is what this resolution means by Hinduphobia and who wrote that meaning.
So off he goes, and I'll leave that playing in the background. And he, obviously, Hinduphobia fundamentally is not great. We are against any sort of bigotry, bias, discrimination, whatever you want to call it. So, as Peter calls it out, absolutely, we must always expose any sort of discrimination. However, House Resolution 69 is not just a simple anti-racism measure. It's a calculated, strategic smokescreen by Hindutva, essentially. The first red flag is staring at everyone in the face in the bill itself. And this actually is the bill. The resolution demands that the US government condemns Hinduphobia, but nowhere in the text itself does it actually define what Hinduphobia is. It's a completely open-ended, undefined legal concept. And it's a very typical sort of tactic, this, and I've seen it before in other contexts. If you don't define something and you keep the definition deliberately loose, it means essentially you can apply the law arbitrarily. Basically means whoever decides what the definition is externally then decides how that law is applied, which is not good law. Because basically when a piece of legislation refuses to define that core term of whatever it is, in this case Hinduphobia, the definition is naturally inherited then from the political groups who authored the bill. And who authored the bill? Well, the Congressional Research Service, which is the non-partisan research arm of the US Congress itself. And they explicitly identified the organisation pushing this resolution. Who was it? Hindu American Foundation. It's Hindutva, of course. Now, they're operating directly within this ideological framework of the Sangh Parivar. And of course, those who might not know the Sangh Parivar, it is, of course, the overarching family of right-wing organisations built around the RSS, Hindutva. So this weaponisation strategy, it's incredibly sophisticated because keeping the term Hinduphobia deliberately vague, the authors are successfully blurring the lines between genuine unacceptable discrimination and legitimate political criticism of a sovereign state's governing ideology. Now, many scholars have documented this trend for years. The moment an academic investigates the caste system, the moment a journalist exposes violence against minorities in Delhi or wherever, the moment a broadcaster points out the trajectory, that authoritarian trajectory of the Modi administration, they're instantly slapped with a label of Hinduphobia. And the hypocrisy is interesting when you look at the US government as a whole and what's actually going on. Only recently, a few months ago, USCIRF, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, formally, and I've reported this regularly, formally recommended that the US State Department place the RSS on its official sanctions list due to all its misbehaviour, euphemistically speaking. So, just these two things side by side. On one side of the floor of the Capitol, a federal commission is demanding international sanctions against a right-wing extremist paramilitary organisation, the RSS. So we must sanction the RSS. And yet on another floor of the Capitol, a resolution drafted by that very same movement's American allies is seeking to make criticism of that movement a recognised form of hate speech. It's madness. It's an active attempt to establish a shield, an ideological and legal shield. If this resolution 69 passes, it will give institutional teeth to a campaign designed to silence dissent, to gaslight victims, to criminalise any people like myself from calling it out. It will become a criminal offence to hold the RSS to account, to call out RSS misbehaviour for what it is. Essentially, it's the international arm of Hindutva trying to write American law once again. So again, this bill has to be stopped. Right, gosh, the clock's counted down. I was going to talk about the Kartarpur corridor. Let's do that tomorrow. I'll add that story to tomorrow. So hold that one. And we'll talk about the Kartarpur corridor tomorrow, in tomorrow's show. Right, yes, indeed. Let's move on to our comments column. And thank you to all of you guys. Loads of comments came in last week. Much appreciated. Thank you to you all for all your massive contributions. And Punjab, one of our regulars. Hi, Punjab. Thanks for your contribution. We talked, of course, about the tragic anniversary, or the anniversary of that tragic death of, or murder of Jagtar Singh Kanda. Interesting, there were, lots of speculation about this, as of course there has been a huge amount of speculation ever since. You say, Punjab, that AML, acute myeloid leukemia, can be caused by all sorts of things, but you do say it can be caused by exposure to certain chemicals or radiation. Benzene, you need a pretty heavy dose of, or exposure to ethylene oxide formaldehyde, even some chemotherapy drugs, but mainly benzene. And you asked the question, was Bhai Jagtar Singh Kanda exposed through his work to any of these chemicals? Obvious answer, I don't know. But the big but there is, of course, that is a question that should have been asked by the police investigation. The police investigators, West Midlands Police, the first thing they should have said after a diagnosis of AML, saying, well, has he been exposed? They would have asked his family, his work colleagues, whatever, has he been exposed to these chemicals? That's one of the basic questions they should have asked, but they didn't. As I pointed out, the investigation was, if any, was cursory. It was shallow. They didn't ask all the obvious questions. We know why. And Narenjit Singh Saini, likewise, you raised, again, the same sort of question. Exposure or ingestion of isotopes of certain radioactive substances can cause AML. I may be wrong, but this is what I think. To be honest, I don't know myself. But ultimately, we do know there are certain toxins that are used by intelligence agencies the world over, particularly Russia, Novichok as a prime example, these radioactive substances that are used by these hit squads, by these intelligence agency hit squads to murder political dissenters. And we had Skripal here in the UK. Polonium, that's another one that was used here in the UK by Russia. So it's well known that Russia uses these sorts of substances to murder their political dissenters here in the West. It's been happening since the Cold War started, if not before. So it's perfectly reasonable that we do know that RAW has very close dealings with the FSB in Moscow. So it's not a huge leap of belief to think that Moscow might have assisted RAW in getting hold of the relevant substance to then assassinate Bhai Avtar Singh Kandar. So the real story here is, why was it covered up by the British establishment? Because clearly there was a cover-up. There is absolutely no doubt in many people's minds that this whole murder of Avtar Singh Kandar was covered up. They did not want the truth being revealed. And I bet you, I don't know for a fact, but I bet you MI5 are fully aware of this. If you guys are listening in, MI5, search your conscience, for God's sake. Anyway, and thank you, Narinderjit Singh Saini, who makes a lovely comment. It was heart-wrenching indeed, but you say, thanks, your discourse is healing, supporting, and a self-reflection. It's empowering and infusing a strong commitment to intelligently react. And just resist. Hold them to account. Indeed, I sit here, as I keep saying, to bring you not just the truth, but to help the community unite and stand up and shout and call out stuff like this. We mustn't let them get away with it. It's appalling that they do. Max Force, this is interesting, and I think I don't disagree with this, actually. It's an interesting comment. Sikhs are generally seen as second-class citizens in the West. There are those who might say otherwise, but I think you're right. I think, but the philosophy behind your comment is, look, your host nations, whether it's the UK, Canada, US, Europe, doesn't matter. Ultimately, your host nations, well, it's an arguable comment. Do they have the duty to protect Sikhs? Do they have the duty to integrate Sikhs and also to support the fight for Khalistan, for example? As you point out, no, they don't. They don't. All they have a duty to protect you, obviously, as citizens in our countries. There is a sort of just a basic duty, obligation on behalf of the government to protect its citizens, especially those who come in from authoritarian, who are fleeing literally for their lives, who are seeking sanctuary and refuge, asylum. But that's where it stops. And this is where, as you rightly point out, Sikhs need to realise that countries like Britain or America are not going to fight your wars for you, much as I wish they would, but they won't. They've got enough to worry about. They'll protect you. Well, that's questionable in itself, because that's a duty that they're failing on in many cases, particularly here in the UK. But ultimately, that's where they draw the line. Western governments draw the line. We will protect you, but we will not fight your battles for you, which I think actually is debatably correct. It's up to you guys. It's up to the Sikh community, as always. If you want to fight, if you want to achieve Khalistan, you're going to have to do it yourselves. But there's nothing wrong with trying to rope in as many people in our Western countries as possible to align with that, because ultimately that pressure is what changes policy, is what makes our leaders change policy to become hopefully pro-Khalistan. SSK, Modi and his RSS have a lot to answer for. Where to begin on that one? That's a whole rabbit hole. Where do we begin? Yes, they do indeed have a lot to answer for. The problem here, though, and again, this comment actually sets up this whole sort of question. Well, how? How do you hold Modi and the RSS to account? We can do it from outside, but you can't do it within India. This is the problem. This is why India cannot legitimately claim itself to be a democracy. It cannot legitimately claim it is run and ruled by the rule of law, because you cannot genuinely hold Modi and the RSS to account. Because if you do, you end up in a prison cell or worse. And this is why the Sikh community are so targeted, particularly those who stand up to hold the Modi regime to account and the RSS to account. Stay safe. Yes, indeed, you point out something that we are very much aware of, particularly here on our channel, is that, 2 other popular channels have been taken down: Thought Police in Action, Cyber Policing, Truth Teller channels. In other words, if you stand up like I do, tell the truth, watch out, because, we're targeted. They're doing everything they can to take us down. I've noticed a lot of our videos recently, particularly those where I criticise India, that they are so throttled, it's very obvious. And we know statistically, when you look at the analysis, is that many of the videos have very high levels of engagement, lots of likes, lots of comments, etc., but the views are relatively low. That is the classic sign of a video being throttled by the YouTube algorithm. And that has happened a lot in recent days, I've noticed. It's very interesting watching the analytics, is that they are really, really trying to throttle this channel. So, which is why you guys have such an important part to play to try and get more people to watch our shows, to spread the word. Please obviously subscribe and like and all that, because that does help the algorithm. But ultimately, the only way that we can break through this throttling is through word of mouth, through social media. You guys need to try and share the videos, just spread the word, because we've got to get the truth out there, because we are fighting this literal battle for survival of the Khalistan movement. I mean, as I keep saying, it is winning. It is deeply powerful, but we can only keep winning if you guys out there, the grassroots, keep pushing it. Did Khalistan say too much truth? Yeah, that's what Khalistan stands for. Stay safe, as you well know, the truth. And the truth always prevails. Now, this one, I love this comment. And this was actually, this jumps ahead to another video, actually. But I was desperate to talk about this one. And it nearly, I thought, is this Critics Corner? I thought, you know what? This is not Critics Corner, because I love this comment. Up Karak made this comment. How's the CIA funded you? Now, I did laugh when I read this, because I wish, and if you guys in the CIA are watching, I don't suppose they are, but if the CIA, maybe if I say that enough times, maybe it's a keyword that'll trigger a CIA agent to look at this show. If the CIA is watching, yes, please fund us, sponsor us. We'll even have a big banner at the bottom saying CIA sponsored. Of course we won't. But ultimately, yes, are we sponsored by the CIA? I wish we were. But it's unlikely that we are. Well, we're not. I mean, obviously we're not. I wish that we were. And WHO Panzer says, look, stop being hypocritical. You're hired by the RSS. So, don't try and call us out for being sponsored by the CIA when you clearly sponsored by the RSS. And Grinda Greywell, I wonder if that's Dr. Greywell. I think that is Dr. Greywell, one of our regular guests. Can you connect us? Which actually made me laugh, saying, yes, please. I think Dr. Greywell is along the same thoughts as myself. Yes, please. If you know any contacts at the CIA, we'd love to give them a call and say, hey, guys, how about a bit of sponsorship? Keep our channel going, please. Talking of which, if you do want to sponsor us, please let us know, because obviously we are fighting a battle where they have demonetized. We make no money at all on YouTube, unlike lots of other channels that make lots of money. Particularly the pro-RSS ones make lots of money, clearly. But we don't. We don't make a penny from YouTube because they demonetized us. So if you want to sponsor the show, or please, if you want to donate, much appreciated. It does help us keep going. But yeah, if the CIA, MI5, CSIS, what's the Australian equivalent? I can't think. Anyway, you guys down under, if any intelligence agencies want to sponsor us. Oh yes, Pakistan. There's another regular we get accused of being funded by the ISI in Pakistan. So if the ISI are listening in, please send us a check. You know how to reach us. So thank you, Up Karak, for giving me a laugh for the day. Cooled Up Grower. I love listening to your podcast and being educated. Keyword there, educated. That's what when I get that comment saying I'm educating people, it gives me a nice warm fuzzy feeling. It means I'm doing a great job. It means I'm doing what I need to do. Thank you very much for always being so respectful when addressing the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Well, why wouldn't I? Of course I do. My Waheguru bless you with a long life to continue helping the Sikh community. Well, thank you for that. Chardi Kala, my favourite phrase, and of course Khalistan Zindabad. Indeed. And Jaspir, good information. Gurjit Gill, I always learn something. Again, that's why I'm here, to pass on the truth. And for those, if I manage to educate somebody, it means actually that's a whole different layer of not just passing on the truth, but if I'm actually teaching you guys something, again, that's a massive achievement, personal achievement. I think, wow. It makes it worth getting up in the morning if I'm achieving that. So thank you for your feedback. It is very much appreciated. But actually, don't forget, it's not just me teaching you. You guys have taught me so much. I have learned so much in these last few years. I often talk about this educational journey about Sikhi, what it's all about, what it means. And yes, up to muffins likewise, always gaining through your knowledge and truth. Appreciated. And you are master. You're doing a fabulous job, Angus. Thank you for your service for truth. Saver. This is my saver. And I do it not just willingly, but I do it absolutely fired up with passion for one particular thing. Not just obviously supporting the Sikh community, which totally deserves it. It is, of course, the end goal. We know what that goal is. It is Khalistan Zindabad. Nijjar Mafia, who always likes to flood our comments with all sorts of pro-Khalistan comments. And thank you for that. Sat Sri Akal to all brothers and sisters of Khalistan. Indeed, what a fine way to finish the show. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, Khalistan Zindabad. So good you said it about 8 times. Well, shout it from the rooftops, because that really is what it is all about. That is why we form a united front to push this one single goal that is being achieved, and we will achieve it. We just have to keep the faith, keep united, and keep treading forward, one step in front of the other. That is how we get there. As the famous motto goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with but a single step. So anyway, do keep your comments coming. Thank you to all of you who have commented. Thank you to all of you who have emailed. Please do keep your emails coming in. Do let me know stories that I need to talk about. Do let me know anything that you pick up, any snippets of information. They're always very useful. Send me a message at satluj.tv.com. I do get all your emails directly to me. And apologies if I don't reply. I still have read it. Much appreciated. But that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week. All being well, God willing, I will catch you guys tomorrow.